The thunder of hooves across the dusty plains of Colorado Territory in 1875 was the only warning Bridget O'Malley had before a handsome stranger burst into her life, changing everything she thought she knew about love and loyalty. Her heart still raw from the betrayal that had nearly destroyed her, she never expected to find salvation in the deep blue eyes of a weathered cowboy who made promises with actions instead of hollow words. Bridget wiped her brow with the back of her hand, her auburn hair escaping its pins as she hung laundry outside the boarding house where she'd been staying since fleeing Denver 3 months ago. The small town of Silver Creek had become her refuge, a place where she could hide from both her past and Thomas Reynolds, the man who had promised her the world only to steal her family's savings and disappear without a trace. "Miss, you might want to step aside," a deep voice called out. Bridget barely had time to react before a massive chestnut stallion skidded to a halt mere feet from where she stood. Atop the magnificent beast sat a man with sun-bronzed skin, his wide-brimmed Stetson shading piercing blue eyes that assessed her with concern. "My apologies, madam," he said, tipping his hat. "Thunderbolt here got a bit spooked by the stagecoach coming in." "You nearly trampled me," Bridget exclaimed, heart racing from the near collision and something else she didn't care to examine. The cowboy dismounted with fluid grace that spoke of years in the saddle. "Keith Everett," he introduced himself, extending a calloused hand. "New foreman at the Diamond B Ranch." Bridget hesitated before placing her much smaller hand in his. "Bridget O'Malley." "A pleasure, Miss O'Malley, despite the circumstances." His smile revealed a dimple in his left cheek, and Bridget felt an unwelcome flutter in her stomach. "The pleasure would have been greater had you better control of your horse," she replied, withdrawing her hand. Keith's laugh was rich and genuine. "Fair enough. Perhaps I can make it up to you somehow." "That won't be necessary, Mr. Everett." Bridget turned back to her laundry, desperately hoping he would leave before Mrs. Henderson, the boarding house owner, spotted them and started matchmaking again. "Well, if you change your mind, I'll be in town for supplies every Saturday." He mounted his horse with the same easy grace. "Good day, Miss O'Malley." Bridget watched him ride away, telling herself the strange feeling in her chest was merely lingering fear from the near accident. After Thomas, she had sworn off men and their empty promises. Her parents had lost their life savings because she had been foolish enough to believe in love. Never again. The following Saturday, Bridget was helping Mrs. Henderson in the general store when the bell above the door jingled. She didn't need to look up to know who had entered. The sudden tension in her shoulders told her everything. "Good afternoon, ladies," Keith said, removing his hat as he approached the counter. Mrs. Henderson, a plump woman in her 50s with kind eyes and a penchant for gossip, beamed. "Mr. Everett, what brings you to town today?" "Supply run for the ranch," he replied, his gaze flickering to Bridget. "Though I must admit, the company makes the errand much more pleasant." Bridget concentrated on organizing the bolts of fabric, willing the heat in her cheeks to subside. "Miss O'Malley, I was hoping I'd run into you again," Keith continued. "Under less dangerous circumstances, of course." "Mr. Everett," she acknowledged with a curt nod. Mrs. Henderson's eyes darted between them with undisguised interest. "Oh, you two have already met. Mr. Everett nearly ran me down with his horse earlier this week," Bridget explained. Keith's expression turned appropriately contrite. "An unfortunate introduction I'm still hoping to make amends for. Perhaps, Miss O'Malley, you would allow me to escort you to the town social next weekend?" Bridget finally looked up, meeting his steady gaze. "I don't attend socials, Mr. Everett." Something flickered across his face, disappointment, perhaps before he nodded. "Of course. Well, my offer stands should you change your mind." After he had gone, Mrs. Henderson nudged Bridget's arm. "That man's been asking about you all week." Half the unmarried women in town would swoon for such attention from Keith Everett. "Then they're welcome to him," Bridget replied. "I have no interest in cowboys or any other men, Mrs. Henderson." The older woman studied her with knowing eyes. "Someone hurt you bad, didn't they, child?" Bridget's silence was answer enough. Later that evening, as Bridget sat on the porch swing with her mending, the sound of a guitar drifted through the warm summer air. Following the melody, she spotted Keith sitting beneath a cottonwood tree across the street, fingers moving deftly across the strings. Several townsfolk had gathered to listen, but his eyes found hers immediately. For a week, Bridget successfully avoided Keith, taking different routes through town and timing her errands to avoid the hours when ranch hands typically visited. But fate had other plans. On Thursday afternoon, as storm clouds gathered on the horizon, Bridget hurried to finish her shopping before the downpour. She was halfway back to the boarding house when the sky opened. Ducking into the nearest doorway of the town's only bookshop, she found herself face to face with Keith. "Miss O'Malley," he said, genuine pleasure warming his voice. "Seems we both had the same idea." Bridget nodded stiffly, shaking raindrops from her shawl. "Mr. Everett, I've been hoping for another chance to speak with you," he said, following her as she pretended to browse the shelves. "You're quite difficult to find when you want to be." "Perhaps that should tell you something," she replied. Keith stopped, his expression turning serious. "It tells me you're avoiding me, and I'd like to know why. Have I offended you somehow?" The directness of his question caught her off guard. "No, I simply prefer to be left alone." "Nobody prefers true solitude," he said softly. "Not really. You don't know anything about me. I'd like to." The simple honesty in those 3 words made her heart skip. Bridget turned away, focusing on the books before her. "I'm not looking for courtship, Mr. Everett." "Then how about friendship?" He picked up a volume of Whitman's poetry. "Do you like poetry, Miss O'Malley?" The unexpected question made her glance up. "I do, actually." "Me too." He opened the book, turning to a dog-eared page. "We were together. I forget the rest," he read, his voice low and rich. Despite herself, Bridget smiled. "Whitman is a particular favorite of mine. See? We found common ground already." Keith returned her smile. "The rain's letting up. May I walk you home?" Bridget hesitated, then nodded. "Just this once." As they walked, Keith told her about growing up on a cattle ranch in Texas, losing his parents to fever when he was 19, and working his way north over the past 10 years. His stories were told without self-pity or bravado, just honest recollections of a life lived on the frontier. "And what brought you to Silver Creek?" he asked as they reached the boarding house. Bridget tensed. A fresh start. Keith studied her face, seeming to read between the lines. "Sometimes that's exactly what a person needs." He tipped his hat. "Thank you for allowing me to walk with you, Miss O'Malley." "Thank you for the escort, Mr. Everett. Will you still not consider attending the social on Saturday?" Bridget shook her head. "Good day, Mr. Everett." That night, Bridget dreamed of Thomas, his charming smile, the way he'd swept her off her feet with promises of adventure and devotion. Then the dream shifted to the moment she'd discovered the empty safe, her parents' devastated faces, and the crushing realization that she'd been played for a fool. She woke with tears on her cheeks and a resolve strengthened. No man would ever get close enough to hurt her again, especially not a smooth-talking cowboy with poetry on his lips and kindness in his eyes. Saturday evening, Bridget sat alone on the boarding house porch, listening to the distant sounds of fiddle music and laughter from the town social. Mrs. Henderson had gone, along with every other resident, leaving Bridget to her solitude. Not much of a party without dancing. A familiar voice called from the street. Keith stood at the gate, still dressed in his ranch clothes rather than social finery. "Mind if I join you?" "Why aren't you at the social?" Bridget asked, ignoring his question. He shrugged, leaning against the fence post. "Didn't seem worth attending if you wouldn't be there." "Mr. Everett, Keith," he corrected. "After our poetic interlude, I think we can dispense with formalities." Despite her best intentions, Bridget felt her lips quirk upward. "Keith, then. You shouldn't miss a social on my account." "I'm not much for dancing anyway," he said, climbing the steps to sit beside her on the porch swing, maintaining a respectful distance. "But I do enjoy good company." They sat in surprisingly comfortable silence for several minutes before Keith spoke again. "Someone hurt you bad, didn't they?" He echoed Mrs. Henderson's words from days earlier. Bridget stiffened. "I don't discuss my past." "Fair enough." Keith nodded. "I respect that. But whoever he was a fool. You don't know anything about it." "I know he lost you," Keith said simply. "That's enough to prove his foolishness." Bridget looked away, unwilling to let him see how his words affected her. "Pretty speeches don't impress me, Mr. Keith." "Not trying to impress you," he replied. "Just speaking the truth as I see it." Another silence fell, this one heavier with unspoken thoughts. Finally, Bridget stood. "It's getting late." Keith rose as well. "Would you permit me to call on you properly tomorrow?" Perhaps we could take a walk after church services. Bridget hesitated, then nodded once. A walk. Nothing more. His smile was like sunrise breaking across the plains. Until tomorrow, then. The following weeks established a pattern. Keith would call on Bridget every Sunday after church for a walk. Sometimes they talked about books, about the changing seasons, about the town gossip. Other times they walked in comfortable silence. Never did he press her about her past, and never did he make declarations or promises she wouldn't believe. Instead, he showed her through consistent actions that he was a man of his word. When he said he would arrive at 2 o'clock, he was never late. When a sudden storm damaged the boarding house roof, he appeared with tools and lumber before Mrs. Henderson could even send for help. When Bridget mentioned missing the taste of peaches from her childhood in Georgia, a basket of the fruit appeared on the porch the following week, delivered from the nearest town with a railway connection some 60 miles away. By late September, Bridget found herself looking forward to their walks, to the sound of his voice, to the way his eyes crinkled at the corners when he laughed. It terrified her. One crisp autumn afternoon, as golden leaves drifted around them, Keith broke their unspoken agreement. "Bridget," he said, using her given name for the first time. "I've respected your privacy, but I'm hoping you might trust me enough now to tell me what brought you to Silver Creek." She stopped walking, wrapping her shawl tighter around her shoulders. "Why do you need to know?" "I don't need to," he replied. "I want to know because I care about you. Because whatever happened still haunts you, and maybe sharing the burden would help." Bridget looked into his earnest face and made a decision. His name was Thomas Reynolds. They sat on a fallen log at the edge of town, and Bridget told him everything: how Thomas had courted her in Denver, winning not only her heart but her parents' trust. How he had convinced her father to invest their savings in a mining venture. How she had discovered, too late, that there was no mine, no investment, only a con man who had disappeared with their money, leaving her family destitute and her heart shattered. "My father had to sell our home," she finished, wiping away angry tears. "My mother takes in washing now. I came here to find work and send money back to them." Keith's jaw had tightened during her story, his hands clenched into fists. "This Thomas, do you know where he went?" "No," Bridget shook her head. "And it wouldn't matter if I did. The money's gone." Keith reached for her hand, then seemed to think better of it. "I'm sorry that happened to you and your family. No wonder you've been so guarded." "I was a fool," she said bitterly. "No." Keith's voice was firm. "You were betrayed by someone who didn't deserve your trust. There's a difference." Bridget looked up at him, surprised by the intensity in his expression. "Not everyone will betray you, Bridget," he said softly. "That's what I thought about Thomas," she whispered. Keith nodded, understanding in his eyes. "I know words don't mean much to you now, so I won't make promises. But I hope my actions have shown you something of my character." They walked back to town in silence, but something had shifted between them. Bridget had shared her darkest shame, and Keith hadn't looked at her with pity or judgment, only compassion and a quiet anger on her behalf. A week later, Keith didn't appear for their Sunday walk. Bridget told herself it was for the best that she had revealed too much, made herself vulnerable again. But as a second Sunday passed without word from him, she felt a hollowness that surprised her with its intensity. "No sign of your cowboy?" Mrs. Henderson asked as Bridget helped prepare dinner. "He's not my cowboy," Bridget replied automatically. The older woman sprinkled salt into the stew. "Funny, then, that Bart from the livery said Mr. Everett rode out 2 weeks ago saying he had urgent business that couldn't wait." Bridget's hands stilled. "Did he say what business?" "No, dear. But he did say Mr. Everett looked determined enough to ride through hell itself." That night, Bridget lay awake wondering if Keith's disappearance had anything to do with her confession. Had the truth about her foolishness changed his opinion of her? Or worse, had he simply grown bored with the challenge she presented? The following Wednesday, as Bridget swept the boarding house porch, the thunder of approaching hooves made her look up. Keith's chestnut stallion came into view, but the man riding it looked nothing like the cowboy she knew. This man was gaunt, with several days' worth of beard and a bloodied bandage visible beneath his coat sleeve. "Bridget," Keith called hoarsely, dismounting with none of his usual grace. She rushed to his side, alarm replacing her anger at his absence. "What happened? You're hurt." He shook his head. "It's nothing, just a scratch." From inside his coat, he withdrew a leather pouch. This is for you. Confused, Bridget accepted the pouch. The weight of it made her eyes widen. What is this? Open it, Keith said, his exhaustion momentarily replaced by something like fierce satisfaction. Inside the pouch was money, more money than Bridget had seen in one place since before Thomas had stolen her family's savings. I don't understand, she whispered. I found him, Keith said simply. Thomas Reynolds. He was in Pueblo, running the same scheme on another family. Bridget's knees weakened, and Keith guided her to sit on the porch steps. How? I have friends throughout the territory, Keith explained. Once I had a description and his methods, it wasn't hard to start asking questions. He sat beside her, wincing slightly. The scratch had come from confronting Reynolds, but Bridget didn't need to know those details. Did you steal this money from him? Bridget asked, suddenly afraid. Keith shook his head. No. I confronted him with evidence of his crimes and told him he had two choices: return your family's money and face a trial, or return the money and leave the territory forever with lawmen in 3 states alerted to his schemes. And he chose to return the money? Bridget asked incredulously. A grim smile crossed Keith's face. Let's just say I can be very persuasive when motivated. Bridget stared at the money, then at Keith's exhausted face. You did this for me? You could have been killed. I did it because it was right, Keith said. And because. He hesitated, then continued with quiet intensity. Because I couldn't stand knowing the man who hurt you was out there, free to hurt others. Tears filled Bridget's eyes. I don't know what to say. You don't need to say anything, Keith replied. But there is something I need to tell you. He took a deep breath. I care for you, Bridget. More than I thought possible after knowing someone for such a short time. I know you've been hurt, and I know you may never be ready to trust a man again, especially not a dusty cowboy with little to offer but his heart. He rose, swaying slightly with fatigue. I won't press you, but I wanted you to know that not all men break their promises. Some of us keep them, no matter what it takes. Bridget stood as well, clutching the pouch of money. Keith, you don't need to decide anything now, he interrupted gently. I just wanted to return what was stolen from you. As he turned to go, Bridget reached for his hand. Wait, please. Keith looked back, something like hope flickering in his tired eyes. You're injured and exhausted, she said. At least let me tend to your wound before you go. In Mrs. Henderson's kitchen, Bridget carefully removed Keith's bandage, revealing an ugly gash along his upper arm. This needs stitches, she murmured, gathering supplies. It's not as bad as it looks, Keith replied, though he couldn't entirely suppress a wince as she cleaned the wound. Thomas did this, she asked, threading a needle. Keith nodded. He didn't take kindly to being found out. As Bridget stitched his arm with careful, steady hands, she found herself studying the cowboy's face. The lines of exhaustion, the stubborn set of his jaw, the gentleness in his eyes despite the pain she was causing him all spoke of a man unlike any she had known before. You rode all that way, confronted a dangerous man, and brought back my family's money, she said as she tied off the last stitch. Why? Keith's gaze held hers. Because you deserve justice. Because your parents didn't deserve to lose everything. And because, she prompted. Because when someone matters to you, you prove it with actions, not just words, he said simply. Bridget's hands stilled on his arm. I've been so afraid, she whispered. So afraid to trust again. I know. Keith covered her hand with his. And you have every right to be cautious. I'm not asking you to trust blindly. I'm asking for a chance to earn your trust, day by day. Bridget looked at their joined hands. You already have, more than you know. The following day, Bridget sent a telegram to her parents with news of the recovered money and instructions for them to join her in Silver Creek. Then she sought out Keith, finding him at the livery stable tending to his horse. I sent word to my parents, she told him. They'll be coming here. Keith smiled, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. That's wonderful. I'm glad your family will be reunited. There's something else, Bridget said, gathering her courage. Something I need to say to you. Keith turned to face her fully, waiting. When Thomas betrayed me, I thought I'd never trust anyone again, she began. I built walls around my heart and convinced myself I was safer alone. She took a step closer to him. But then you came along with your poetry and your patience and your unwavering decency. Keith's expression softened. Bridget, Please, let me finish, she said. What you did for me and my family riding out to find a dangerous man, risking your life to right a wrong that wasn't yours to fix it showed me what loyalty truly looks like. She reached for his hand, a gesture that would have been unthinkable weeks before. I'm still afraid. I still have doubts. But I'm more afraid of letting fear keep me from something that could be wonderful. Keith's fingers closed around hers. What are you saying? I'm saying I'd like to see where this path leads, Bridget replied. If you're willing to be patient with a woman who's still learning to trust again. The smile that broke across Keith's face was like sunshine after a storm. I would wait forever if that's what it took. He raised her hand to his lips, placing a gentle kiss on her knuckles. I won't make promises I can't keep, Bridget O'Malley. But I will promise you this, I will never give you cause to regret trusting me. In the golden light of autumn, they walked through town hand in hand, taking the first steps on a new journey together. Behind them lay betrayal and pain. Ahead, the promise of healing and hope. 2 months later, with the first snow dusting the Colorado mountains, Bridget stood with her reunited family and watched as Keith dismounted in front of the small house they had purchased with the recovered money. Her father, initially skeptical of any man showing interest in his daughter, had gradually warmed to Keith after witnessing his unwavering respect and hearing the full story of his journey to recover their savings. Miss O'Malley, Keith called, removing his hat as he approached. Might I have a word? Bridget's mother exchanged a knowing glance with her husband before they discreetly retreated inside, leaving the couple alone on the porch. You look serious, Bridget observed, studying Keith's expression. I am serious, he replied, taking her hands in his. About you. About us. A fluttering sensation filled Bridget's chest. Over the past months, their courtship had progressed with careful consideration of her past wounds. Keith had never pushed, never demanded more than she was ready to give. And with each passing day, the walls around her heart had crumbled a little more. Bridget, Keith continued, I know you've learned the hard way that words can be hollow. So I won't fill this moment with flowery speeches or grand declarations. He reached into his pocket and withdrew a simple gold band. Instead, I'll ask one question and make one promise. Bridget's breath caught as he knelt before her in the snow. Will you marry me? He asked, his voice steady but his eyes revealing the depth of his emotion. And if you will, I promise to show you every day what loyalty and love truly feel like. Tears filled Bridget's eyes, not tears of pain or fear, but of joy and hope reborn. Yes, she whispered, then stronger. Yes, I will marry you. As Keith slipped the ring onto her finger and rose to pull her into a tender embrace, Bridget marveled at the journey that had brought her here. From the depths of betrayal to the heights of love, from broken trust to a promise she believed with her whole heart. I love you, Keith Everett, she murmured against his chest. His arms tightened around her. And I love you, Bridget O'Malley. Today and always. The following spring, as wildflowers bloomed across the Colorado foothills, Bridget and Keith exchanged vows in Silver Creek's white-steepled church. Mrs. Henderson wept openly in the front pew, while Bridget's parents beamed with genuine happiness for their daughter. Not all promises are meant to be broken, Keith whispered as they shared their first dance as husband and wife. Some are meant to be kept for a lifetime. Looking into his steadfast blue eyes, Bridget finally understood the difference between empty words and true commitment. Thomas had taught her how easily trust could be shattered. Keith had shown her how beautifully it could be rebuilt. As dusk settled over the small frontier town, the newlyweds slipped away from the celebration to stand together on the porch where they had first conversed on that summer evening nearly a year ago. Did you ever imagine this is where that first thundering approach would lead? Bridget asked, leaning into her husband's embrace. Keith chuckled, the sound rumbling pleasantly against her back. I knew from the moment you stood your ground against me and Thunderbolt that you were someone special, and I thought you were just another cowboy with more charm than substance, Bridget admitted. Can't blame you for that, Keith replied, pressing a kiss to her temple. But I'm grateful every day that you gave me the chance to prove otherwise. As stars appeared in the clear spring sky, Bridget turned in his arms to face him. You know what I've learned? She asked, tracing the line of his jaw with gentle fingers. What's that, Mrs. Everett? The new name still sent a thrill through her. That sometimes it takes a broken heart to recognize a faithful one when it comes along, she said softly. Keith captured her hand and pressed a kiss to her palm. And sometimes it takes a faithful heart to heal a broken one. In the years that followed, as they built their life together, first on the Diamond B Ranch where Keith continued as foreman, then on their own small spread nestled against the foothills, Bridget often thought back to those words. Through the birth of their children, through drought seasons and plentiful ones, through all the joys and challenges of frontier life, Keith kept his promise. Day by day, year by year, he showed her what loyalty truly felt like, not in grand gestures like his journey to find Thomas, but in the thousand small ways he demonstrated his love and commitment. In the coffee he brought her each morning before dawn, in the way he listened when she spoke, in his unwavering support of her dreams and ambitions, in his partnership through every trial and triumph. And Bridget, who had once vowed never to trust again, found herself living a life rich with the very trust and love she had feared was forever beyond her reach, all because a determined cowboy had shown her that some promises are meant to be kept, and some hearts are truly worthy of trust.